You are experiencing the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast.
It is October 9th, 2024, and welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty, where we're bringing you the people and the organizations fighting for liberty around the country and in your region. And today we have a special guest with us, a returning guest, Susan Shelley. She is the Vice President of the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. And she's also an editorial writer and columnist for the Southern California News Group and the Orange County Register. So thanks so much, Susan, for joining us. And we're going to talk today about the propositions. So that unfortunately, we got scary things ahead of us in October, and it's not just Halloween; it's the election coming up. So we've got some things to talk about here, so we can get ready for how to address those ballot items. But before we do that, let me introduce you to the rest of the panel. In our lower left-hand corner, we have Leon the Word Brathwaite, last word in Liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. In our lower right-hand corner, we have our special guest today, Susan Shelley. And my name is Jason McPhee, and I'll be your host today. So we always start out the show with a Liberty quote. And so this time the quote is going to be from Winston Churchill. And I thought this particular quote was kind of appropriate that we remember this when we go to the polls and we vote on stuff. This particular quote is, "There is nothing government can give you that it hasn't taken from you in the first place." So just remember this, there's no free stuff on that ballot. Don't know if you guys wanted to opine on any of this or not.
Well, I think Winston Churchill had it exactly right. They took it from you. It's like a giant withholding on the income tax form, giant withholding, and then they trickle it back to you with strings. So that doesn't seem like a very good deal, does it?
Not at all. I mean, I guess it's a a kind of a take from the Milton Friedman's favorite quote that there's no such thing as a free lunch, and so. I mean, Winston Churchill is correct, obviously, but I think Friedman, to me, said that a little bit better, that there's no such thing as a free lunch, So, yeah, the government takes and the government gives, but, there's always a price to pay for that. So usually the price we pay is our liberties. So there we go.
Well, Leon, that free lunch, when it comes back to you, it's like there's a few bites taken out of that sandwich. And it's usually about a day old too. So
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I would be jumping up and down for that. Well, before we jump into things, so let me show you Susan's website here. So you can find her on x.com, formerly Twitter, at Susan Shelley at X. So just search for that. And you can also find her as well at the Los Angeles Daily News. We can also see many of the stories that she's published along with at her X page as well. So before we jump into the actual ballot measures, I wanted to kind of take a second just to see where we are in the state with things. So I pulled up a few graphics, and this is the state expenditures and revenue. And by the way, this does not include special fund stuff. So because I was looking at this and I was thinking, well, that's odd. We're only spending $230 billion roughly in California. Well, no, actually, it's around 300, but there's about 70 or 80 billion of that is in special funds. So there's all kinds of ways the government is spending money that isn't quite transparent. And so you can go to their webpage as well, and you can kind of see a breakdown of where that revenues and expenditures are. But it's also important to notice, too, as well, that we're kind of in a budget deficit right now. So, the state, as usual, seems to have spent more than it takes in. And this is the California's fiscal outlook for this year's budget. And they're saying in the executive summary that it's a $68 billion deficit. So there's that. And then I also wanted to note, too, that there's no free lunch with bonds. Apparently, we already have debt outstanding of about $79 billion in bonds as well. And about 30 more billion have already been authorized but haven't been put out yet. So it's like about $110 billion almost in bonds. So before we jump into this, I just want you to know that we're spending a lot of money already, and we're actually spending more than we have at the moment. So anyways, so let's get down to the ballot items, I guess. So Susan wrote an article recently where she actually talks about her picks. And so we're going to go through this with her to talk to her about the different propositions, because there's about, I don't know, roughly 10 or so propositions on the ballot this year. And so let's get into talking about that. And I guess the first one to start out with is this Proposition 2. And so this authorizes bonds for public schools and community college facilities by legislative statute. And apparently it's authorizes another $10 billion in bonds. So just add that to the pile of bonds that we already have. But Susan, aside from just spending more money, it sounds like there's a little more to the story, because you actually had an article here where I guess there's these project labor agreements where, you know, some of the reason I guess we are spending so much of this money is just because a lot of this is just kind of union graft. So you want to tell us a little bit about what's going on with this proposition?
Absolutely. Well, what's going on is they just want to keep borrowing money to keep these building projects going, but they never fix the high priority needs. And they come to us on every ballot. You can find them in every county doing this. We have to get the asbestos out of the walls and the lead out of the water in our schools. You know, the taxpayers of California have approved $54 billion in K through 12 bonds since 1998. $54 billion with a B. If there's still asbestos in the walls and lead in the water, who's going to prison for it? Where's the accountability for the priorities that they've set, that for all these decades, there's still asbestos? If that's the truth, somebody should be held accountable for that. But instead, what they do is they set up this system of first come, first serve to give out these bond funds. And that favors the districts that have lawyers and consultants and a big tax base and a lot of money. One of the requirements is, except for the very lowest bondable, the ones with the lowest bonding capacity, very lowest, everybody else has to do a local match. And that means up to 50% of the money you get from the state, you have to match locally. That means local bonds raise property taxes for decades. So this actually does raise local taxes if your district is going to get any money. And none of that is good. They're still not going to fix the asbestos. It's going to be first come, first serve. And they are favoring not removing asbestos, not making the schools safe from earthquakes. They're favoring schools that do a project labor agreement on their projects. That gets you extra points for extra money. And really, that is just despicable, because a project labor agreement is a collective bargaining agreement that binds everybody, all the subcontractors, everybody, before hiring starts. So it locks in a certain number of contractors who are eligible for these contracts, and something like 83% of the workforce in construction in California is excluded from that. All the contractors who are non-union are excluded from that. They're not going to get a penny of this business. So what is this exactly? This is rewarding political allies and not fixing the problem. Another $10 billion, and they say that's not even enough. So they'll be back for more with the same story. No on Proposition 2.
Totally
Sounds like
agree. But let me ask you something, Susan. I mean, this claim of lead and asbestos still in the walls of our school or in our ceilings or wherever the hell it is it actually true that that this thing is still in place? That asbestos, for instance, is still in place?
I don't think so. I hope not. I think it's just a story they're telling us. I mean, you can put things in these ballot labels that don't necessarily have to be verified. I'm not sure. If someone sued them and said there is no asbestos, maybe you could do discovery and find out. Nobody does. There was a reporter who told me that the Oakland schools did a test on the water in the school buildings and it had lead in it. And that once again raises the question, what is California prioritizing if they're not getting lead out of the water in the schools in Oakland? That's despicable. So it's a management issue is what I'm saying. It's not how much money we spend, it's who's spending it and how they're making their decisions.
Indeed.
It sounds almost like another educational bridge to nowhere, I guess, which is kind of like where most of our education dollars go. I mean, certainly you look at the I guess the output that we get from the schools, and so many times the kids are below whatever averages they're measuring around the world. So it just, in fact, we talked about it on one show where not California, but it was in I think it was Baltimore, Maryland.
Baltimore. It was Baltimore,
Yeah,
Maryland.
they had 13 schools where none of the kids, literally zero, none of the kids were math proficient. And it was just like, how does that happen? I mean, that's like a statistical anomaly to be studied in a math class, you know?
Well, and enrollment in the California schools is falling and is projected to fall further by 2030. So the idea that they have to build more schools when actually they should be consolidating and changing and maybe building in different places, it's another question. The other part of Prop 2 is that every dollar that the state borrows and spends on this is a dollar that a developer doesn't have to pay in fees for a new development. So you can get there's several different pots of money that you can tap for new schools. There are mellow roost taxes, which are a form of property tax for the local community. There's developer fees, there's local bonds, there's state bonds, and there's the state budget. And if you ask me, if there's lead in the water in Oakland, they should take money out of the state budget and they should fix that without paying 30 years of interest on it. They should just prioritize school safety. Why is that a difficult concept for this government to figure out?
You know, the crazy thing is too, if we were doing school choice and if it were a private school, I think you could pretty much bet that the government would be forcing them to make sure that they have all this stuff in compliance. But somehow it's at the government school, then they just keep on going and keep on asking for more money.
Very good point.
It's only the government gets away with criminal conduct. That's the only government. It's only the government does. They could violate our rights. They could keep the lead or in water, and they could keep the asbestos in the walls or wherever it is. And that to me sounds criminal. But why?
I think it is.
Yes. So how could they get away with it when if we're in a private entity, we could not possibly get away with anything like that. We could not.
Sometimes they're sued for these different things, for ADA violations and different types of problems. But guess who pays the settlement after the thing is resolved? The taxpayers. So you don't come out ahead. They should have better decision making on high priority issues like student safety. There's no negotiating something like that. There's no arguing that student safety should be prioritized. And yet here they come to us every 2 years with another bond to remove the asbestos. I think it's a scam. I'm not even sure there is asbestos in the walls, but obviously it polls very well, and they think people will fall for this again and again. But as I said, if there's still asbestos in the walls after $54 billion since 1998, somebody should go to prison for it.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
It almost sounds like the way that these health scares are timed for elections too, but that's another story. But the next item on our list, so that Prop 2 sounds like a bit of a boondoggle, but Prop 3 is the constitutional right to marriage. So it's a legislative constitutional amendment here in California that would essentially remove the language that says that marriage is only between a man and a woman. So meaning that it essentially allows for gay marriage or I guess other things possibly. But for a libertarian perspective, I mean, this one sounds kind of like good news. So what do you guys think about this one?
This is absolutely a yes. The Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association hasn't taken a position on it because it's not taxpayer related. But the legislative analyst says it makes no difference at all in California law. It's just lining up with what the Supreme Court has said. So it doesn't accomplish or not accomplish anything. It leaves everything the same. It's really just symbolic, I think, that we don't want to be insulting people in same-sex marriages. That's not where we are anymore.
Fair enough. I mean, the government being involved with marriage is kind of a stupid idea to me, but I can see the point of the proposition.
Yeah, if they're going to be involved, then at least let's take their thumb off the scale, I guess.
Well, there's no reason to insult people, and so that it doesn't have any legal effect, but it is on your ballot, and I'm voting yes.
Yeah. Hey, one of the things that I'm glad to hear from your perspective at Howard Jarvis Taxpayers that there's no hidden costs here, because it does feel like every time you vote for something, there's a trap door somewhere. But this one sounds like a good one. So
we're getting to the trap door. There's a huge trap door. Houdini would have been proud. It's a huge trap door in the stage on one coming up. But let's go ahead.
Okay, well, let's move on to Proposition 4. Okay, so this one authorizes bonds for safe drinking water, wildfire prevention, and protecting communities and natural lands from climate risks. So that sounds like a little bit of a warning right there, and and apparently it's a legislative statute. So, but anyways, this one authorizes another $10 billion in funds. So, and it says
Right.
increased state costs of about $400 million annually for 40 years to pay for the bond. So that's so. What do you think about this one, Susan? I mean, I'm already kind of a little bit skeptical every time climate is used to justify just about anything nowadays.
Interestingly, climate was in the ballot title originally, and they did some polling and they took it out. And now it's the Clean Water Bond. They took the word climate right out of it. So that tells you something's going on. And once again, they can say that this is for climate, but that doesn't make it so. They can say it's for clean water. They can say it's for a train from San Francisco to Los Angeles. It doesn't make it so. They have a terrible record on doing things with bond money. And bonds are the most expensive way to pay for anything. And this measure doesn't really pay for anything that's going to be lasting for the 30 or 40 years it takes to pay off the bonds. What this does is fund programs, grants for non-governmental organizations and businesses and some government agencies, grants to do programs, which is another way of saying salaries. And once that money is gone, it's gone. And we're going to be paying interest to repay it for 40 years. One of the things in this bond is pop-up tents for farmers markets and electric van pool vehicles for agricultural workers. Who ever heard of a 40-year car loan for an electric van pool vehicle? That's what this is. It also funds things that don't exist and aren't going to exist in any reasonable time frame, like $475 million for development of offshore wind energy. Well, there's no project, there's no approval. The federal government has to sign off. It's in international waters. What we're going to do with $475 million, which once again, in a bond, it's locked in. It must be spent on development of wind energy because that's what you said in the bond. That's the law. It's going to be consultants writing reports every year telling us how far behind schedule they are.
Mm.
And we're paying interest.
And they'll also tell us how wonderful wind energy is when they are shutting down wind projects all over the country.
Right.
One of the things too that strikes me about that is I'm trying to figure out how wind ties into the drinking water, the wildfire prevention, and the protecting communities from and natural but from the climate risk. So that big fan out there is going to
yeah, with its backup engine.
Well, this is one of the things that kills me about this issue because, we literally just had in the state of California in one of our national labs, I think it was in Lawrence Livermore, where they had a fusion breakthrough. And so they are literally scaling up industrial size fusion over in Europe right now. It is called the Tokamak project. And if they get those things, they're literally projecting to have those online in the next decade. So if those things are online in the 2030s, all this stuff with wind, solar, and all that other stuff, it's sort of like, you've got power plants that, because fusion is essentially clean nuclear, I guess. There's no waste product afterwards because essentially you're taking hydrogens and you're fusing them together into a heavier element instead of, diffusing larger elements and then having the radioactive decay for years to come. So it's just one of those things where it's funny that happened here and government spent some money on it and yet nobody's talking about it, which just, kind of blows my mind.
Well, you're exactly right. We're paying a lot of money for this transition to so-called renewables, which are defined in law as solar, wind, and some little novelty things like geothermal and biogas and stuff that's not producing any megawattage at all right now. So those are the renewables. But hydro does not count as renewable, even though it is, and nuclear doesn't count as renewable, even though it is. So what are we doing? We're subsidizing the development of wind and solar energy companies. People are making a lot of money off of these mandates for utilities to buy power from solar and wind generated energy companies. And this is very expensive because I don't know if anyone in Sacramento has noticed, but the sun goes down. And every night we run this state on natural gas, hydroelectric power, nuclear, and imported electricity from other states. comes in on wires, and we don't ask how they make it.
Yes.
So what are we doing? We're paying for everything. We're paying for the reliable dispatchable energy, and we're paying for the goofy solar and wind, which is intermittent and unreliable. And that's why electricity bills in California have gone up as much as 100% in 10 years.
I
Susan,
will push back on
I
that one.
spent,
Well, hold on, Leon, just a second. I was going to push back just on one thing, though. When they do get that imported electricity, they do sort of demand a paper trail that there's a certain balance of renewables in that electricity. But I mean, this is, kind of a, it's a bookkeeping issue and stuff. So,
I
they're
haven't
trying.
seen that paper trail. We're
no, no,
point me to where I can see that.
Jason, you know where I used to work, okay? I can tell you that so-called paper trail is a bunch of crap, okay? You know where I used to work. Now, and I was just going to tell Susan this definition of renewable, okay? And I can tell you, I've worked in energy for, for almost 40 years. I'm retired now. There's no such thing as renewable energy, but I can explain that in the next show because it'll take a little bit of a while, but there's no such thing. That is totally made up by people like the Energy Commission where I used to work. It is nonsense. Anyway, we could go on.
And I'll tell you what's really frightening. What's really frightening to me is they have started to put seed money into programs for what they call demand response. Well, that's a nice way of saying turning off people's power, either paying them to agree to have their power turned off or just turning it off, like rolling blackouts. And when do we have this problem? We have this problem when it's 110 degrees all throughout the state, which happens in the summer, and people are going to die in their houses without air conditioning, without electricity. And sometimes they're doing rolling blackouts for fire safety, and they're taking out the street lights and the stoplights. And this is very dangerous. We're playing this game of fantasy. It's like fantasy league energy policy. And it's very dangerous and very expensive.
Total illusion and delusions. That's what it is. That's what it's all about.
Well, and the crazy thing is that, if the goal is, CO2 in the atmosphere or whatever, then, the nuclear is kind of like the clear baseload answer, and even people like Bill Gates said there was a story where they're trying to restart up, I think, 3 Mile Island or something like that. They're essentially trying to use that as a power source for Microsoft. I saw something about that the other day. So anyways, it's there's just all of these things that we've seen the left who have been like adamant against, issues of climate change, and they're also against nuclear. And it's like, these things are kind of like there's a discontinuity in their thinking. So
you're expecting rationality in people who are totally irrational. Right now, the governor is fighting to keep Diablo Canyon, which is our probably last nuclear facility that's open in the state. They're trying to keep it open right now. Why? Because they just realized their madness is coming to a head, and they do not have enough reliable power to meet the needs of within the state. And they're trying to keep Diablo Canyon open. I don't know how long they want to keep it open for, but they're trying to keep it open. Even though all these years they've been telling, oh my God, we got to shut down this nuclear. We got to shut it down. We got to shut it down. We got to shut it down. Now comes the time. And what they're saying, no. We got to keep it open for another few years or whatever it is they're talking about now. It's nonsense.
It's very dangerous because they don't take into account that investors are making decisions and bond analysts are making decisions, and they're looking at what you're doing and they're saying, well, California is getting off fossil fuels. They've banned internal combustion engine car sales as effective, I think, 2030 or 2035. You have to take that into account, 2035. You have to take that into account in planning for energy investment. They can't do what I would do, which is say, don't be ridiculous, it's never going to happen. They can't do that. They have to plan, and they have to set interest rates for loans and various different kinds of things that are affected by these executive orders and these plans to go off of this or more of that or less of that. So it does have a real world impact on energy investment in the state. And ultimately, all of these policies just drive up the prices.
It does.
And
but I can tell you one thing, one bit of good news, and just remember, you heard it here first. You see that ban on gasoline-powered vehicles? It will be reversed within the next 5 or 10 years. I promise you that. I just remember where I used to work, but I promise you.
what I was going to say on that note too, remember when that edict went into play, that executive order, it wasn't until the very next summer that Newsom then had to say, "Oh, and please don't charge your cars during the daytime."
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes, you remember that one? Yes.
this is going well.
Yeah. So,
I think it's all just driven by campaign donations and vanity, going to Paris and having your picture taken, that kind of thing. I don't think
Yes.
there's any real rational policy behind it at all. I've had the opportunity as a member of the editorial board to interview some of the candidates for Assembly and Senate who are running for reelection. And when you hear them talking about energy, we had one candidate, an Assembly person, tell us that she makes her decisions about whether the oil companies are gouging or not by driving by the same gas station every day and noting what the prices are. And she says that tells her whether they're price gouging in California or not. That's someone voting on energy policy in California.
yeah,
I'm not making that up.
this price
I-
gouging
I don't-
nonsense is just.
I don't doubt you. I don't doubt you for 1 second. The amount of lunacy that I've seen in this state, and of course, like I said, I used to work at the Energy Commission. The amount of lunacy I've seen, please, I don't doubt it at all. I don't.
Well,
I have
let's
witnesses.
let's
Wasn't the only
jump
one on
to
that call.
Let's make sure we make it through all the lunacy of the proposition.
Okay.
So let's get to Prop 5.
Prop 5 is very serious. I'm going to
yeah,
stop
so now,
laughing because Prop 5
getting
is
away
very
from
serious.
the Prop 4 boondoggle, then it sounds like Prop
No
5.
on Prop 4, and no on Prop 2, and no on Prop 5. And let me tell you why no on Prop 5. It makes it easier.
Let me say what the title is first, real quick, Susan. So it allows local bonds for affordable housing and public infrastructure with 55% voter approval, legislative constitutional amendment. So that's what we're looking at here. It changes the percentage, so it doesn't need quite as many people, I guess, to force new spending, or taxation, I guess. So go ahead, Susan.
Okay, so since the gold rush era, Californians have had a taxpayer protection in the Constitution. Since the gold rush, 2/3 vote of the electorate to take on local debt. Now, why is that? That was in the 1879 Constitution. In the 1849 Constitution, handwritten on parchment in the gold rush era, they said the legislature is directed to make sure that cities do not take on too much debt in order to prevent abuses. That's how long this protection of the 2/3 vote for local debt has been law in California. And this legislature decided it's too hard. It's
Well, hold
too
on, Susan.
hard.
On that note, let me just stop for a second, because if you're watching on public access, you're going to have to hear the rest of the story online. So go online, check us out at knuckleheadsofliberty.com, and you can find the rest of the story there. Go ahead, Susan.
Okay, you don't want to miss this. Okay, so we had this taxpayer protection of the 2/3 vote. This legislature decides it's just too hard because when you take on local debt, it raises property taxes, and people won't always vote for it if they think it's some kind of boondoggle or it's too expensive or they don't want it or their taxes are already too high. It's hard to get everybody to vote for new debt. So it's supposed to be hard to vote for new debt because it's paid for on the property tax bills. It's like a mortgage voted by other people on your house. And that's why it has a 2/3. This is very dangerous because currently we've changed the Constitution about 25 years ago to make the threshold for school bonds 55% instead of 2/3. And supposedly there was going to be all this oversight. Well, the oversight has really not worked out very well. There are oversight committees, but they're stonewalled by the school districts and they can't get the documents, and then you can't do anything about that. There's no enforcement. So the accountability is a little shaky, and the threshold is too low at 55%. In LAUSD, the Los Angeles Unified School District, residents are already paying $128 per year per $100,000 of assessed value of their house. And the median home price is something like $1 million in the LAUSD district. So when you have something like that and you are paying already $128 per $100,000 of assessed value, there's a bond on the ballot right now, $9 billion. It will add another $25. It's too easy to raise property taxes with school bonds. And Prop 5 expands that to everything else. Anything that can be called infrastructure, which is everything government does. and also all the affordable housing projects, homeless housing projects, programs for down payment assistance. Local governments can do bonds for all of those things and pass them, if Prop 5 passes, with 55% instead of 2/3. And the result will be that you get one or two of these things on your ballot in every election, one from a transit agency, one from an association of governments, one from a fire district, one from a library district. After every election, your property taxes will go up, and in a few years, people will be losing their homes. And that is a very bad thing.
I was just trying to look this up while you were talking, and I think this is a recent story talking about how they're trying to put in this low cost housing in LA back a couple years ago, and the price of the project was like exceeding, I think, over $700,000 a unit, I think is what it was saying. So,
Some of
anyways,
them
we
800.
yeah, so
Yeah.
we hear these ridiculous stories, story after story, where it's just yeah. Anyways, but this was an article from Reason, anyways, so I just figured I'd throw that out there
Well,
while you're
no, that's
talking about it.
they're right. The former controller of the city of Los Angeles looked into how this $1.2 billion bond for housing for low income and homeless people was being spent, up to $800,000 a unit. And one of the things in Prop 5 is that everything built under this Prop 5 standard is considered a public works. Well, a public work means that prevailing wage laws apply. And prevailing wage laws mean you're paying the highest union wage that anyone can find in the region. So it's what, 20, 30, 40, 50% more expensive than if you use non-union labor, perfectly qualified, top quality contractors, and 83% of the workforce in the construction industry in California. If you use them, it would be a lot less expensive. The taxpayers would get more for their money. But no, we're going to use the prevailing wage, the smaller workforce, the union contractors. It's very corrupt.
Mm. Yeah,
No
the
on
sad
five.
story about,
That's for sure.
yeah. Well, the sad story with low cost housing is that almost all of these instances are issues where the price has gone up because of government usually being in the way. So, I mean, the idea that somehow we're going to invoke government and that's just going to magically make the cost go down. I mean, it might if they're just giving it away to an individual, who's going to live there, but it's going to cost more to society for that person, I mean, because it's all of us paying for it. It's like what Winston Churchill was saying in the beginning. There's no free lunch. I mean, if they're giving it, it's because they took it from somebody else.
That's true. And in this case, they're taking it from property owners. And something that everyone should remember is that property taxes are paid by everyone because they're levied on apartment buildings. It comes through as higher rent. They're levied on commercial buildings. It comes through as higher prices. Even the smallest little donut shop in a strip mall is going to have those higher property taxes passed through on its lease right away. This is called a triple net lease, and they wind up paying the property tax increase out of the profits from the donut. How much can you sell a donut for? You can't keep raising property taxes after every election. This is not a one-time thing. This is an engine to make it easier to raise property taxes over and over and over. And it has to be stopped. The author of this, Cecilia Aguiar Curry, just said in a webinar with the Sacramento Housing something or other organization that she's coming back. If this passes, she's coming back for more attacks on Proposition 13's protections for a 2/3 vote on tax increases, because she doesn't like that either. She thinks that should be 55%. Well, why don't they just take it all? Why don't they just point a gun at the heads of the California population and take it all? Because that's the path they're on. They're coming
Don't
after
give them any
Proposition.
ideas, Susan.
Yeah, don't be
Well, they're very much against guns, so I think we're safe there. Yeah.
Well, Kamala says she owned a gun, which was surprising
Yeah.
to all of us, but you never know.
I don't know. Don't know whether she owns a gun or not.
But this whole housing thing is really a scam, because I mean they want to give it to these homeless people, underprivileged people, but particularly with the homeless people, they're treating the wrong problem. They think that, oh, if we just give them a home, everything will be nice and wonderful. When most of the times that someone is homeless, the vast majority of the times, someone is homeless is because of mental disease or drugs or alcohol. And so they're building a bunch of homes for homeless people is really useless unless they deal with the underlying problems.
And
So
it's sad in California because we've had a law on the books since 2016 called Housing First, which prohibits the rental authorities from turning down someone for this housing because they're still using hard drugs and they won't go into a sobriety program. You can't turn them away because of that, and you can't reserve these scarce units because there are not enough of them. You can't reserve it for people who are on a path where they're trying to get well, because you would get better outcomes if you could use it as an incentive. And if
right,
you could help people who were helping themselves, you'd get better outcomes. And instead, what we have is people overdosing in these hotel rooms and free apartments. And then the government agencies that handle this stuff are stonewalling the press. Cal Matters has filed a lawsuit to try to find out how many deaths and injuries there have been in these types of shelter properties, and they can't get the information. They're being stonewalled. So
there
it's
you
not
go.
a healthy situation.
There you go. That's right.
Yeah.
There you go. Treating the wrong
Well,
problem.
Mhm.
yep. Yep, government getting in the way and throwing fuel on the fire, it seems like always. But so let's jump on to the next boondoggle, I guess, because 5 sounds like another one. Prop 6, this eliminates the constitutional provision allowing involuntary servitude for incarcerated persons. So essentially, this impacts the amount that I guess a prisoner can be paid for prisoner service in a prison. And this kind of, from a libertarian perspective, I mean, you do kind of get a sense that, hey, we don't want the government just throwing people in jail for slave labor. But I don't really feel like that's what's happening here in California. I think what's happening here in California is any way they can to reach further into taxpayers' pockets is kind of what's happening. And this, and Susan, I guess you wrote an article on here. You said, "Don't be fooled. Proposition 6 is a fraud." So I'm sure you have something to say about this.
Yes.
Yes. Well, what they're saying is that it's slavery to have prisoners work while incarcerated. They're saying that's slavery. They're saying that the Constitution must be changed to take out the exception to the ban on indentured servitude. We have a ban on indentured. We've never had slavery in California or in the Constitution, but we have a ban in the state constitution on indentured servitude, except as punishment for crime. Proposition 6 takes those words out. Now, I thought initially looking at this that this was just archaic language and they were taking it out and it didn't make any difference. But as you said, currently in California, it's the law that incarcerated persons must work, and about a third of the state prisoners do jobs which are in the prison, part of running the prison. If you can't require them to work, then you're going to have to incentivize them to work, or you're going to have to bring in somebody else from the outside to do those jobs. But what was most eye-opening to me was the staff report from the Senate Appropriations Committee, which talked about what they called anticipated litigation. And what's that about? Well, there have been a number of court decisions in the past looking at the issue of whether prison inmates have to be paid the minimum wage for doing work in the prison. And every decision has come down, no, they're not employees, because you have these words in the Constitution that you can have indentured servitude as punishment for crime. If you take those words out, all those court decisions fall. And if we get a court decision that says prisoners who work have to be paid the minimum wage, either the federal minimum wage or the state, could be either one, it will cost taxpayers billions of dollars a year at the state level and at the local level, because this applies to jails also, not just state prisons. So that's kind of a big trap door, as we were talking about earlier. It's like we're all going to fall through that. It's going to be an unexpected billions and billions of dollars that taxpayers have to come up with to run the prisons. And that is not great, and it's not disclosed to the voters. What it says in the legislative analysis on the ballot and in the ballot booklet is that the maximum might be like tens of millions of dollars for this, but it doesn't take into account what could happen in the courts. They can't predict that that'll happen, so they can't analyze it. But the Senate Appropriations Committee analyzed it, and they said that's exactly what could happen. So everyone should know about that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things. Oh, go ahead, Leon.
No, I'm just gonna finish the point. No on 6, right? Is what you're saying,
No on
right?
6. No on
There we
6.
go. All right.
one of the things that kills me on a lot of these prison issues is that in California, I used to follow this. I haven't checked on the rates in the last couple of years, but we used to spend over $100,000 per prisoner to incarcerate a prisoner every year in the state prisons, and that's I mean, you figure our recidivism rates are terrible. I mean, so the idea that a lot of these people, they're going in there, they're not being reformed, and then they're coming back out and they're doing more crime, and yet we're spending top dollar on these institutions, and it's like, I mean, from a libertarian perspective, I mean, I prefer not to have so many people in prisons, but that's because I prefer for a lot of things we throw people in prison, with victimless crimes that, they aren't being thrown in for that. But, if you are violating somebody else's rights and you're thrown in jail for that, my gosh, if we're spending top dollar, you should be reformed by the end of the time you're in there. And so I kind of like to see some, I guess, competition, I guess, in this industry. And yet, every time they talk about this, it's no, it has to be done by government. And my gosh, we spend top dollar, we get the worst results, and now they want to spend more. So it just, yeah, I'm just kind of
Well,
frustrated with it.
it's my understanding that the people who are still in state prison are not the people who didn't do anything to anybody. It's not the victimless crimes, because they've done this realignment and they've moved people to the county jails and they've tried to depopulate the prisons because of overcrowding issues and the court orders and this kind of thing. It's my understanding that they're in there for things that are serious enough that you wouldn't say they shouldn't be there. That might be wrong. And I am 100% in favor of innocence projects and looking into everybody who says that they didn't do it. I don't think people should be coerced with plea bargains. You don't want the prisons mismanaged. You don't want people abused in any way when they're working or if they won't work. You absolutely have to have decent, respectable, responsible management of the whole thing. But that said, you have to look at the fact that there are people who are harming other people and they shouldn't be on the streets. And we've had a bad experience in Los Angeles, certainly, with a district attorney who was leaning all the time in favor of not incarcerating people and trying to work the angles to get people closer to parole. And we have some horrible stories as a result of that. And we interviewed DA George Gascon at the editorial board several times, and I asked if there were success stories that his staff could share with us. We never heard back.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully Gascon will get kicked out after this election. I hope so, but who knows?
I think one of the things the left gets wrong is they often assume like property crimes are victimless crimes, and they aren't, right? I mean, that's what we're kind of seeing that now, that all of these people. In fact, I remember we had a case here in Sacramento not too long after lockdown started, where I think there was, or right around that time, where some guy had a small convenience store, and he was probably a migrant, it sounded like, from his background. And somebody came in, they tried to walk out and steal some stuff. He confronted the guy in the parking lot. The guy hit him, he hit his head on the ground, and he died. And this is a productive person who's doing some good work in society by running that store, and he's getting killed because the government's just not doing anything to stop all of this small theft. So it's real cause.
And we have insurance rates going up in California, and you can't tell me that some of that isn't the result of this wild crime wave we're seeing everywhere. Businesses that can't get, some of it's from the homelessness situation where you have encampments that are starting fires. There are businesses that can't get insurance at all. There are apartment building owners that can't get insurance at all. It's quite a serious situation in California, and certainly having the sense of an out of control crime wave. And it's really not just a sense. When you walk into a store and they've put everything behind plexiglass and locks, they didn't do that because they heard a talking point from a Republican on a talk show, as the Democrats like to say. They did that because they're having an actual experience of crime in the store. That's very expensive and very inconvenient, and it puts off the customers. If they did it, there's a reason for that. So it's real. It's not illusory.
Indeed. And Susan, just for clarity, Gascon is up for re-election this coming election, is he not?
Yes, he is. He is on the ballot in November. He's running against Nathan Hochman, and he's running quite far behind in the polls from what I've seen.
Yes.
So I think he's at the end of the rope here.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, I guess on to the next boondoggle. That seems to be just a list of boondoggles every time they put these propositions out. But let's go to 32, and this one is raise the minimum wage. I think that's self-explanatory. They
Yes, it
want to
is.
push it up to 17 and then $18 eventually. I thought that they had well, no, it was the fast food workers they pushed to $20 an
20.
hour, and we already
Yeah.
saw some of the scandals around that with Newsom.
Yes. So two things about this. First of all, the jump in the numbers. We went from Prop 6 to Prop 32. We're not skipping around. The legislature did a special bill to number their own measures that they put on the ballot, 2 through 6. And then the rest of them start at number 32, picking up the old numbering from the previous election. Those are the citizen initiatives that were put on the ballot. So that's why there's a gap in the numbers. So Prop 32 is an initiative to raise the minimum wage. I believe the original intention was to get it on the ballot in 2022, but they missed the deadline for signature verification. So here it is, a little bit out of date on the ballot in 2024. But raising the minimum wage doesn't create the revenue to pay the minimum wage. So it typically ends up with people having their hours cut. And in some cases in the hospitality industry in Los Angeles, we've seen lower weekly wages as the hourly wages have gone up. The weekly wages have gone down. So it's not a perfect solution. The better solution is to have a lot of business growth and a lot of hiring, and that pushes wages up organically and to everyone's benefit.
Yeah. To me, one of the things that the minimum wage always it kind of, I guess, illustrates is the failure of the public school system too, because this idea that somehow the schools, the government run schools have these kids for 13 plus years, and then they come out and they can't even command a floor that will make a livable wage, which, to me, that the idea then is not then to have government come in and, oh, let's just force everybody to give them money. The idea is, hey, wait a second, let's maybe rethink having government do all the school, because clearly if enough people are coming out that this is an issue, then and quite frankly too, I think the numbers I saw a few years ago, it's only just a few percent of people who really are hit by the minimum wage. But when you push their wages up, then that's going to kind of domino everybody else's wages a little bit too. So but anyways, yeah, it's just, my take is that you're fixing the wrong problem here, by saying, hey, it's sad that these guys don't make enough. Yeah, it's because they don't have the skills. Why don't they have the skills? It's because government was in charge of giving them the skills.
Very good point.
I mean, when you really think about it, why do you need a minimum wage? The market is very good and very efficient at setting wages for everybody. Why do you need a minimum wage? And if the government is going to arbitrarily decide, well, it's better to have $17 versus $15 or versus $10, or it's better to have $20 versus $10. If the government have decided that, and that is so good and wonderful, well, make it $100 an hour, and then everything will be better in your logic. So I don't know what is in need of the minimum wage. I see no purpose to it. I think the marketplace is very efficient and at setting wages for everybody.
Who was the Senate candidate in the primary in California? Was it Barbara Lee? I think it was Representative Barbara Lee, a United States Congresswoman, who said that the minimum wage should be $50. I believe she said that.
Oh, wow.
And, okay. I wouldn't want to run a restaurant if it's going to be a $50 minimum wage. I don't think you're going to have a lot of customers for $200 dinners, but okay.
Leon, I think Barbara heard you when you said why not 100, or maybe you said why not 50 when she heard you. So don't say why not 100 or 100.
I should start giving out ideas like this. Jeez.
A lot of people in government very bad at math. The staffers are good though. And if you go on the legislature's website in California, leginfo.legislature.ca.gov, you can read the analysis of each of these terrible bills, and you can see that these lawmakers were warned, well, this might happen and this might happen and this isn't great and that's not great, and then they vote for it anyway. So it's pretty frustrating.
Well, and it's funny too, because earlier we talked about a proposition that did have low-income housing. Well, talk about bad ideas. We go to Prop 33, and that one is for rent control. So expands.
This is just terrible. There is one law in California that protects property owners who own rental property. It's called the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act. And what it says is that you can't put rent control on single family homes and condos and townhouses, single unit rentals, and you can't put vacancy control on a unit, meaning that when a tenant moves out, you can't say, aha, the rent control rent stays for the next tenant. What Proposition 33 would do is repeal that law. It takes the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act from 1995 off the books, and it says that the state can never pass another law like it again. So it would have to go back to the ballot if you wanted to protect property owners. What this creates is political risk in the housing industry. Let's say you want to invest in building an apartment complex in Berkeley, and you're the lender maybe, and you're making a decision about whether you're going to approve this construction loan. And you turn on the news that evening and you see some city council candidate calling for crazy radical rent control, vacancy control, and single family homes would be under rent control, and everybody has to register their property, and greedy landlords were coming after you. And you see this on the news. That person and two more like that person could get elected, and that 30-year mortgage that you're about to write on the construction loan, the whole building could go into foreclosure. There's no way to know what the economics of that business are going to be. You're introducing political risk into the housing industry. People will run from that. They will not invest in rental housing in California with no property rights protections at all. They just won't. And a lot of small landlords will just give up the ghost and sell the buildings to corporate owners.
We saw this too with, during the lockdowns, when government thought it was a great idea to mandate that everybody be locked down and not productive. And then at the same time, they thought, ooh, and nobody's going to be able to afford rents. Well, let's just say nobody can charge rents. If you can't pay them, you don't have to pay. And, we actually saw, I think, Pacific Legal. In fact, we even had somebody on the show a while back who talked about that. But I like this. They had this one article here that they wrote, and they had a Thomas Sowell line in here that, this is basic economics, but it says that the first lesson of economics is scarcity. And then he said the first lesson of politics is to disregard the first lesson of economics. So we'll use that as one of our Liberty quotes at some point on the show. but this is the thing, right? I mean, price controls. This is Econ 101. I mean, you want prices to speak because there's information in the prices that it helps everybody out to understand scarcity, what's happening in the marketplace. And when you just, as a politician, fiat say, I know better what the price should be. Well, no, there's no way you know better, because all of these prices adjust based upon all these different scarcities of everything happening. There's this one great little video document or video edit. Video essay called "The Pencil" by Leonard Reed, and it's out there. And I just urge anybody to go see that, because it really it's about a 7-minute snapshot of really how the world works, about how prices adjust, and that's how cooperation happens. But apparently these politicians just never understand that, and we get ideas like rent control over and over again. In fact, even the Supreme Court didn't help us out this time around. Reason had an article that said that that they kicked it, but hopefully, people like Thomas will push to take up some of those cases in the future. So, but yeah, it's too bad.
We can always hope and pray. The part of these rent control arguments that nobody ever considers is the side of the landlord. When they told us all about those COVID mandates that oh God, the landlord cannot charge rent because you are not productive. The landlord still have to pay the mortgage on that property, right?
And mortgage, the property taxes, the insurance, the electricity and water bills, the maintenance, all of it.
Still have to pay it. So nobody care about the landlord, but they care about the supposed renter, right? Who could just live there for free.
Well, there was a former city council member during the pandemic. He was a current city council member at the time, now former, and he said that the pandemic was a wonderful opportunity to essentially drive these private landlords and small hotels out of business, so that those properties could be picked up dirt cheap and turned into homeless housing. And that was like the answer to a prayer for this particular city council member, that they were going to drive people into bankruptcy with their policies. just they had thriving little businesses. They were doing fine. They weren't asking for anybody's help. They were fine. And then in comes the government to say you can't collect rent, you can't raise rent, you can't evict your tenants. You just have to sit there and lose money by law. And then it would be a fine opportunity, that was his view, to scoop up those properties. This should be criminal. This is
Yeah.
not worthy of being in the United States of America. That's just
Price controls are theft by fiat. There's just no way around that. But
Yeah, exactly.
well, on from that bad idea to the next one. We're hitting the home stretch, so don't worry. The bad ideas, there's a light at the end of the tunnel here. No, we're on 34. And this one restricts the spending of prescription drug revenues by certain healthcare providers. And I was a little bit uncertain of exactly what was happening here. It says requires certain providers to spend 98% of revenues from federal discount prescription drug programs on direct patient care, and authorizes statewide negotiation of medical drug prices. So I don't know. I mean, we just had somebody from oh gosh, I can't think of the organization, but she was talking about that the Citizens Council for Health Freedom, I think it was. And I mean, there's just so many good ideas for free market healthcare out there, and yet every time we turn around, the government's trying to get in there and do more. What's your thought on this one, Susan? I wasn't completely
well.
clear on what's happening.
This is actually simpler than it sounds. So let me take you through the entire Sherlock Holmes thing in about 1 second, because you could go through the whole mystery of it. But here's what's happening. This is the landlord's revenge. The AIDS Healthcare Foundation has sponsored and financed this rent control thing that we just talked about, Prop 33 on the ballot, and 2 just like it before. This is the 3rd time since 2018 that the apartment associations and all their members have had to raise a ton of money to fight this radical rent control unleashing measure. It's the AIDS Healthcare Foundation that has done this. Where do they get their money? They participate in a federal drug discount program in which they buy prescription drugs at a discount, but they bill the government for them at retail, something like that. And they take the spread, the profits from these drug sales, and they divert it into politics for unrelated things. And the apartment associations had enough. And so they put this on the ballot. It's the definition of who it applies to is drawn very specifically. To my knowledge, it only applies to the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. And what it says is that if they are making money in the federal drug discount program, they must put that toward patient care. And they cannot spend it on things that are outside of their core mission. Otherwise, they'll lose their nonprofit status, which of course is a death sentence for an organization. So that's what this is. The Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association supports it because we think that it's been abusive, the way that this money has been diverted to try and fight for these rent control measures, which would be so destructive in California. And that's what's going on here. This is a little bit of inside politics, or throwing the ball up and in on the hitter, and it's hardball, no question about it.
Yeah, I didn't really understand it. Yeah, I mean, thanks for that, because I really did not understand what was going on in this, excuse me, in this proposition. Well, thank you.
That's what's going on. They don't want to say it, but that's what's going on.
Yeah,
So we're a yes on that. We do think that this is a system that has been abused, and
Sure.
and that it would be better if nonprofits stuck to their core mission rather than meddling in politics.
Well, if Howard Jarvis thinks so, then I guess I'm on board. But boy, I tell you, I wonder if having something that's not clear, will work. Hopefully, it it
There
works.
is, you're right about that. There is a lot of confusion. Which one is 33 and which one is 34 and which one are we for and which one there is a lot of confusion. So people might vote no on everything. I think the landlords might be fine with that if they vote no on 33 and they vote no on 34. I don't think the apartment associations would consider that a bad day at the office. I think they'd be happy if 33 just goes down.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's jump on to 35 then. It provides permanent funding for medical health care services. So let's see, it makes permanent the existing tax on managed healthcare insurance plans, which, if approved by federal government, provides revenue to pay for Medi-Cal healthcare services. So it sounds like, it's essentially keeping a tax in place, or does this actually raise another tax?
Now, there is a temporary tax that the legislature passed on managed care organizations like Anthem Blue Cross, and uh, all these taxes always raise the cost of health insurance generally. Somebody pays. There's no way around that. What should the money be used for from this tax? It's temporary. It's going to expire. According to everybody in Sacramento, the legislature is going to make it permanent one way or another. The governor would like this money to continue to be in the general fund for anything he wants to do or anybody else wants to do, even if it's just reducing the deficit. So they're taxing the healthcare companies and the money's going to something unrelated. The healthcare companies would like this money, they'd like the tax to be permanent, and they would like the money to go to Medi-Cal providers. Now, on the surface, that sounds great because Medi-Cal is the health insurance for 14 million Californians. 1/3 of the state is on the safety net health insurance for very low income people. 1/3 of the state. If you want to get a picture of what's going on in California in the real world outside of Silicon Valley. So there aren't enough doctors. There aren't enough procedure facilities. There isn't enough of anything, and there are long waits for it. The reimbursements are among the lowest in the nation in California for doctors who see Medi-Cal patients, and it's not working. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is for the legislature to properly fund Medi-Cal and stop expanding it endlessly. Right now, they've expanded it to 100% of the undocumented population that comes to California. If you come over the border and you locate in California, you are instantly eligible. If you're low income, and everybody is, if you're low income, you're instantly eligible for full scope Medi-Cal. That's full health insurance. That's not the restricted scope that other states do, which is emergency and pregnancy and a few other things. Full health insurance, like any low income California citizen would have, available to 100% of the undocumented population that comes into the state, no waiting period. Really? Even when you start a new job, there's a 30-day waiting period for health insurance many times. No waiting period. Come on in, sign up, and it's on the California taxpayers 100%. That portion is not even matched by the federal government because the federal government prohibits matching funds for care for people who are in the country illegally, except for that restricted scope slice of it. So that's a long way around saying that California's been totally irresponsible with the Medi-Cal program, and the providers are under reimbursed, and they want to make this tax permanent and direct the money to themselves. So what's wrong with that? What's wrong with it is politics interfered in how they wrote the thing. And a whole big chunk of money goes into a workplace fund to fund raises. They called it, I think, retention of the workforce, which is pay raises. So this whole block of funds is directed to pay raises for the union healthcare workers. And then you've got another big block of funds that's going to what they called reproductive care, but it's really going to Planned Parenthood. And then the private ambulance companies have a big carve out. They get a big chunk of the money. And this is a ballot measure. So it can't be changed by the legislature later. They can't be tinkering with the formula and the division of the money. It's locked in. It's really not sounding all that great as a way to solve the problem of funding Medi-Cal. So the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association has not taken a position on it. They don't like the managed care tax at all. So they don't think it should continue, and they're not taking a position because wherever the money goes, they're against it. So they're not taking a position. I'm voting no on it. I think it looks like a kind of a giveaway to political interests.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I do agree with that. Yes.
Jason, we lost your audio.
Jason.
Sorry about that.
There
I
you
was
go. Okay.
muting so I wouldn't get cough all over everybody.
Ah.
But no, it just seems like every time it's a government program, if you're not sure what it's doing, it's probably best just to vote against it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're about at the end of the tunnel here. So we get to Prop 36 and allows felony charges and increases sentences for certain drug and theft crimes. And this one, it sounds like it's trying to fix some of the chaos that's been done in the past of just people being able to run through the stores and grab as much as they want, up to $1,000 every day, and then do it again tomorrow. Is that kind of where this one is going, Susan?
That's exactly what's happened here. The Prop 47 in 2014 which was named by the proponents the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act. Who could be against safe neighborhoods and schools?
Right.
It,
Yeah.
it essentially was sort of sounding like a libertarian type of proposal where these minor drug crimes, minor theft crimes, people should not be going on 3 strikes type prison sentences for these minor crimes. So it separated that out so that they wouldn't. But the trouble was that it created this secondary problem of like a professional ring of people who are doing small thefts continuously, and they're never really prosecuted for it because each one is viewed separately as a minor crime. This fixes that. It says on the 3rd offense, the sentencing can get tougher. It tries to divert people into mandatory treatment. A lot of prosecutors have said they sort of lost the leverage that they had to get drug addicts and alcoholics into treatment or prison. They would choose treatment and they would have a shot at improving the rest of their lives and saving their lives. But they lost that leverage. And we've had really a terrible problem with homelessness and drug addiction and now fentanyl deaths. And it's just been really awful on the streets of California. I don't think it's all the fault of Prop 47. Some of it was the COVID policies where they just stopped enforcing everything on the streets completely. And some of it was the choices that different district attorneys like George Gascon made. It's not all Prop 47, but probably some of it is. And so this fixes some of those prosecutorial issues so that on the 3rd offense, some people could even be sentenced to prison if it was a 3rd offense and the circumstances were bad enough. It takes those restrictions off the prosecutors and the judges and gives them more discretion. It's pretty thoughtful. It's not a return to mass incarceration. It's nothing like that. It doesn't repeal Prop 47. It just tinkers around the edges a little bit to try and correct some of the problems that were, I think, unintended and very serious.
So you
Yeah,
the Jarvis Howard Jarvis Association is not taking a position on this.
No, Howard Jarvis is yes on this. And the reason is that all of these little crimes have a big effect on taxpayers because you have the first responders cost and you have the homelessness issue. That's a cost for taxpayers. And also we have the insurance crisis, which has been worsened by the situation with excessive crime and too many fires and all of that. So the Jarvis Association did take a position in favor of Prop 36, and I'm personally also in favor of Prop 36, having questioned all the proponents and opponents of it. I think it's fine. It's pretty thoughtful. It's not that radical, and I think it's an improvement on what we have now.
Fair enough.
And just to put out a shout for libertarians, I guess most libertarians, anyways, are not for I guess people being able to go and rob other people constantly. The idea is
I was really talking about
no.
the drug crimes. I'm sorry, I should have been clear about that.
I get that, but
Yeah.
my big thing is, and I think most libertarians are we wish that the government didn't have so many victimless crimes out there that they're putting people in jail for. But this is something like where with this shoplifting, I mean, this is something where even if a guy steals a case of beer, that could work into somebody trying to defend their case of beer and then being killed over it. So,
Sure.
libertarians are definitely all about property rights. And so I think it's madness where we've currently gotten to where, the left has just decided that, oh, it's just a property crime, so no big deal. Because often it's not their property, so it's no big deal.
There was a period of time where there were just smashed windshields on the streets of San Francisco. You could not park a car on the street of San Francisco without having the windows smashed and anything inside taken out. And that certainly is not a victimless crime. That's a very expensive thing and the catalytic converter thefts.
Mhm.
And there was an individual who was an actor who was killed in Los Angeles late at night because he walked up on somebody who was stealing his catalytic converter and they shot him.
Yes.
And
So
we
it's not
talked about it.
victimless.
Well, we talked about it on this show too, how insane it was in San Francisco, where they were literally advising people just leave your windows down so the windows don't get smashed on the car. I mean,
Right.
that's the solution, right? Instead of actually prosecuting somebody for destroying your property. It's crazy. But
Yeah.
that's where we are. So yeah, this one sounds like a yes. You're always skeptical on voting for something in government, but I mean, oftentimes I guess we're trying to undo some of the damage that other laws have done. So,
I'm voting yes. If you want to simplify it, I'm personally voting yes on 3, 34, and 36.
yeah, and just
big
so
no on
people
everything
know.
else.
Well, you can find Susan Shelley's well, she just did an article on this. It says my picks for the November election. So you can find that article. It's at thedailynews.com under Susan Shelley, and it's probably on your X page as well, I'm sure.
It's pinned to the top. Pinned to the top for
yeah.
the duration of the campaign.
Sure. So I just want people to know that that's there in case you want to go back and check any of these out. We're just about at the end of the show, and so I did want to, if you have time, I wanted to hit our Knucklehead Noise Patrol real quick. So Susan, do you have time for that?
Sure.
Okay, so we're talking about now. Our Knucklehead Noise Patrol is usually about somebody who's done something kind of ridiculous or said something ridiculous. Usually, it's a politician or somebody in the public eye. And recently they had the vice presidential debate, and one of the candidates self-described himself as a knucklehead, so we couldn't let that go by. And so let's find out exactly what that's all about. He was actually being fact-checked, I guess, which is an amazing thing. That's like a miracle that a Democrat candidate is being fact-checked on one of these networks. But it had something to do with him going to claiming, like Joe Biden claims so many times that he's done so many things. Joe Biden sounds like the most exciting man in the world if you believe all the things he said about himself. He's marched with Nelson Mandela and all these other things.
Well, he does own a Corvette, so
yeah. But Tim Walz, I guess, is trying to march into that cut, I guess, and so he's talking about being in Tiananmen Square when the whole thing went down with the students being suppressed there with tanks and everything else. So James, do we have can we pull up KNP number 1? Now, this video, I fast forwarded it because he's asked this question about him being there, his fact check, and he rambles endlessly. So I had to fast forward it. So you're going to hear him get really fast in this. But anyways, let's go to the tape. KNP 1.
Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now, look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect, and I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans benefits. And then the people of Minnesota were able to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything, many times I will talk a lot, I will get caught up in the rhetoric, but being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID, and I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community, and then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
So that was an unbelievable amount of just shoveling of the BS to cover himself.
Filibuster.
Exactly. But then the most incredible thing happened. She actually got called on it by the moderator. And so now we have the video of that, which is, I didn't bother to speed that up because it's short and sweet. James, do you play KNP2?
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
So maybe short and not so sweet. I don't know.
This man making knuckleheads look bad, boy. Really bad.
It's a bad name to knucklehead.
Oh
Wait,
my.
it does get worse. There is one other little clip I had where he probably misspoke on this one thing, because I don't think he's probably really friends with school shooters. But we have a little clip of that too, where he claimed to be friends with school shooters. So here we go. James, can you play KNP3?
Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but it's only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. But I've not been perfect, and I'm a knucklehead at times.
So there you go.
Oh. That's disturbing. Yeah. How did this happen? How did this guy not get vetted before being selected as vice presidential material? How did this happen? Does no one own one of those Google machines that they could like look things up? What happened here?
They don't have Google in the campaign in the Harris campaign. They don't have Google, and they don't have any other means of vetting this guy. Unbelievable.
Boy.
Well, it shows, I guess.
Budget.
Well, if this was Kamala's choice, I'm a little bit scared of the other choices she might make when she gets into office.
I'm telling you, this should have been. This is probably the most important thing she should have. The most important decision she had to make, because this is the person who would be stepping in if, God forbid, something should happen to her if she's elected. And this is the man she chose? Really? I think that says a lot about Kamala rather than about this knucklehead, this self-proclaimed knucklehead we just saw there on the screen.
Well, while we're crying about policy, we'll at least be able to laugh it off, I guess.
Oh, man. Well, it can all be fixed. Let's end on a happy note. It can all be fixed. All of our problems are man-made policy errors. It can all be fixed with better leadership. Not with that guy, but with better leadership.
I'll take that.
Well, and I wanted to pull up your webpage again. So, James, maybe you could pull this up real quick. So this is Susan Shelley's X page again. So search for Susan Shelley at on X.com. And you can also find her again at the Los Angeles Daily News. And probably just Googling her for her articles too. You could find some of them, but those would be certainly two places to go. Susan, did you have any final shots or messages you wanted to put out before we wrap?
For anybody who lives in California and wants a no on Prop 5 yard sign, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association is giving those away. Go to nonewtaxes.com, and click one of the buttons that says get a yard sign and sign up, and we'll get that to you.
Well, that sounds like an excellent message to end on. No on new taxes.
No on new taxes, exactly.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Susan, and thank you in our audience for joining us as well. And until the next show, think about what you can do in your community. I mean, we've had people doing celebrations for Constitution Day. We've had people in lots of local organizations. In fact, we're going to have one coming up that is on the Election Integrity Project. So, just all kinds of people who are out there trying to find ways to protect our liberty, because I tell you, we don't stand up. There's a whole bunch of people out there who are looking to take our liberty, as shown by all these ballot measures, I think.
So, exhausting, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, thanks again so much. And until next time, stay tuned and stay free.
Oh, yes, indeed. Susan, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.